20 years ago, a master mechanic in Tokyo told me something that changed how I think about engine oil forever. He said, "The oil you choose is more important than the car you drive." At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. Oil is oil, right? As long as it meets the viscosity spec on the cap, it should be fine. But then he showed me something that made my jaw drop. 5 identical engines. Same model, same year, same mileage. They had been running on 5 different oil brands for exactly 200,000 miles under controlled conditions. When he pulled the valve covers off, the difference was staggering. One engine looked like it had 50,000 miles on it, another looked like it should have been scrapped at 100,000. Same driving conditions, same maintenance intervals. The only variable was the oil brand. I remember staring at those valve trains trying to understand how this was possible. The clean engine had camshaft lobes that still showed the original machining marks, barely any wear at all. The oil return passages were spotless, like they'd been cleaned yesterday. The rocker arms moved smoothly on their pivots without a hint of resistance. Then I looked at the dirty engine, and it was like looking at 2 different decades of neglect compressed into the same mileage. Varnish covered everything in a brown, sticky film. The cam lobes had visible wear steps where the metal had been ground away. One of the lifters was actually stuck, frozen in place by deposits that had hardened into something resembling dried concrete. The mechanic explained that both engines had received exactly the same care, exactly the same attention, exactly the same maintenance schedule. The only difference was the molecular quality of the oil protecting them. That test stuck with me, and over the past 2 decades I decided to conduct my own version. Not in a laboratory, not with fancy equipment that costs more than most cars, but in the real world, with real vehicles, real driving conditions, and real money on the line. I bought 5 used fleet vehicles, all the same make and model, all with roughly 50,000 miles on the odometer. I assigned each one a different motor oil brand, all meeting the same API and ILSAC certifications, all the same viscosity grade, all changed at exactly 5,000-mile intervals. Then I drove them, and drove them, and drove them some more, for 200,000 additional miles per vehicle. That's 1 million miles of total testing across 5 different oils, 1 million miles of data, 1 million miles of wear patterns, 1 million miles of answers to a question almost no one has the patience or resources to answer properly. The project consumed 5 years of my life, 5 years of meticulous documentation, 5 years of oil samples sent to laboratories, 5 years of compression tests, leak down tests, bore scope inspections, and fuel economy measurements. 5 years of people telling me I was wasting my time because all modern oils are basically the same. They were wrong. The results proved it beyond any shadow of doubt. What I'm about to share with you isn't marketing hype. It's not sponsored content. It's raw data, oil analysis reports, teardown photos, and real-world results that will probably surprise you. Because the oil that won wasn't the most expensive. It wasn't the most heavily advertised. And it definitely wasn't the one most mechanics would have predicted. But before we dive into the results, I need to know something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you want to know which oil brand you should actually be using, hit that subscribe button and tap the like, because what's coming next could save your engine and your wallet. Let's get into it. The test methodology was designed to eliminate every possible variable except the oil itself. Each vehicle was a 2015 sedan with a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine, rated at 185 horsepower and designed to run on regular unleaded gasoline. All 5 cars were purchased from the same fleet auction. All had complete service histories and all passed a pre-test compression and leak down test to confirm the engines were in identical condition. The odometers read between 48,000 and 52,000 miles, which for fleet vehicles typically means highway miles with consistent maintenance, exactly what I needed for a fair baseline. The selection of this specific engine was deliberate. It uses a conventional port fuel injection system, not direct direct injection, which eliminated variables related to carbon buildup on intake valves. The variable valve timing system is hydraulically actuated, making it sensitive to oil quality and viscosity, which meant any oil-related issues would show up quickly. The engine design is known for durability when maintained properly, but also known for developing problems when neglected, giving me a platform that would reveal differences between oils rather than masking them with over-engineered tolerances. Before starting the test, I performed comprehensive baseline measurements on all 5 engines, compression tests using a calibrated gauge at precisely 250 engine RPM, which is the standard cranking speed, leak down tests at 100 psi with measurements taken at top dead center on the compression stroke for each cylinder, bore scope inspections with a high-resolution camera documenting the crosshatch pattern angle, depth, and uniformity on all cylinder walls. I measured the oil consumption rate by carefully tracking oil level over 1,000-mile intervals, establishing that all 5 engines consumed between 0.2 and 0.3 quarts per 1,000 miles, well within manufacturer specifications. I even performed a cold cranking test at 10 degrees Fahrenheit to confirm the starter motors and batteries were equivalent, because cranking speed affects oil flow during cold starts, and oil flow affects wear. I labeled the vehicles as Car A through Car E and assigned each one a specific oil brand that I'll reveal as we go through the results. Every 5,000 miles, each car received a fresh oil and filter change using its designated brand. No mixing, no switching, no exceptions. I used the exact same filter brand across all 5 vehicles, a premium synthetic media filter with 99% efficiency at 20 microns to eliminate filtration as a variable. The filters were cut open and inspected at 50,000-mile intervals to check for unusual debris or filter media breakdown. None was found, confirming the filters were doing their job consistently across all test vehicles. At every oil change, I pulled a sample using a clean, dedicated pump for each vehicle to avoid cross-contamination. The samples were immediately sealed in sterile laboratory bottles, labeled with vehicle ID, mileage, and date, then shipped via overnight delivery to the same independent laboratory for analysis. This lab specializes in fleet oil analysis and has no financial ties to any oil manufacturer, ensuring unbiased results. They measured 23 different parameters, including viscosity at 100 degrees Celsius, which represents normal operating temperature, viscosity at 40 degrees Celsius, which represents cold oil condition, total base number, which indicates remaining detergent and alkaline capacity to neutralize combustion acids, total acid number, which indicates how much acidic contamination has built up, fuel dilution percentage, coolant contamination, wear metals like iron from cylinder walls and rings, copper from bearings, aluminum from pistons, chromium from rings, lead from bearings, and tin from bearings. They also measured additive metals including zinc and phosphorus, which form the anti-wear ZDDP compound, calcium and magnesium, which are detergent carriers, and molybdenum, which is an advanced friction modifier. Every data point was recorded in a master spreadsheet that eventually grew to over 3,000 individual measurements. The driving conditions were split into 3 categories to simulate real-world use: 40% highway driving at steady speeds between 55 and 70 miles per hour, 40% mixed city and suburban driving with frequent stops, traffic lights, and moderate acceleration, and 20% severe duty cycles including short trips under 5 miles, cold starts in winter temperatures, and occasional towing of a 2,000-pound trailer. This mix represents what most drivers actually experience, not the ideal conditions you see in laboratory tests. Every 25,000 miles, I performed additional diagnostics: compression tests to measure cylinder sealing integrity, leak down tests to identify where compression losses were occurring, whether through rings, valves, or head gaskets, bore scope inspections through the spark plug holes to visually assess piston crown condition, cylinder wall glazing, and valve deposits, and fuel economy measurements over a standardized 200-mile loop to track efficiency changes. changes. By 200,000 miles, each vehicle had undergone 8 complete diagnostic cycles, generating a mountain of data that revealed patterns no short-term test could ever show. Now here's something critical that most oil comparison tests get wrong. They focus exclusively on protection, which is important, but they ignore the other half of the equation, which is how the oil behaves over its entire service life. An oil might provide excellent protection for the first 3,000 miles, but if it breaks down rapidly after that, you're driving on degraded lubricant for the last 2,000 miles of your change interval. Japanese mechanics understand this deeply. They don't just ask if the oil protects, they ask if the oil maintains its protective properties throughout the entire interval. That's why my test included used oil analysis at every single change, giving visibility into how each oil aged over 5,000 miles of service. Have you ever wondered why some engines make it to 300,000 miles while others need rebuilds at 150,000? Drop a comment with your theory, because the data I collected answers this question in ways you probably haven't considered. Car A ran on what I'll call Premium Synthetic A, a well-known brand that's heavily marketed with racing endorsements and high-performance claims. The oil carried a premium price, roughly $60 per 5-quart jug, making it the most expensive option in the test. The marketing promised advanced additive packages, extended drain capability up to 15,000 miles under normal conditions, and superior high-temperature stability even under track conditions. The bottle featured motorsports imagery, bold performance claims, and technical specifications that looked impressive on paper. The viscosity grade was 5W30, meeting both APISN and ILSAC GF5 specifications, which are the current industry standards for gasoline engines. On paper, it looked like the obvious winner. In practice, the results were more complicated than anyone would have predicted. For the first 100,000 miles, Car A performed exceptionally well. The used oil analysis showed minimal viscosity degradation, with the oil remaining within 3% of its fresh specification even after 5,000 miles of service. The kinematic viscosity at 100 degrees Celsius measured 11.2 centistokes fresh and 11.5 centistokes used, well within the acceptable range for a 30-weight oil. The total base number started at a robust 10.5, which is higher than most conventional oils, and depleted to an average of 5.8 at the 5,000-mile mark. While that's a 45% drop, the remaining TBN was still adequate to protect against acid corrosion. The excellent retention of anti-wear additives, specifically the zinc and phosphorus compounds that form protective films on metal surfaces. Fresh oil contained 1/200 parts per million of zinc and 1/100 ppm of phosphorus. After 5,000 miles, those numbers dropped to 750 ppm zinc and 680 ppm phosphorus, about 38% depletion, which is normal for a quality synthetic. The wear metal counts told an even better story. Iron, which primarily comes from cylinder bore wear and piston ring wear, averaged only 14 parts per million across the first 20 oil changes. Aluminum, from the pistons themselves, averaged 7 ppm. Copper, which indicates bearing wear, stayed at 4 ppm. These are fantastic numbers that indicate the engine was being protected at a molecular level. The internal inspection at 100,000 miles confirmed what the oil analysis suggested. The valve cover came off to reveal camshafts with virtually no visible wear, lifters that moved freely without any sticking, and oil passages that were clean and clear. There was minimal varnish formation, just a light tan coloring on some surfaces that's completely normal for any engine. The PCV system was functioning properly, the oil separator wasn't plugged, and there were no signs of sludge anywhere in the upper engine. Fuel economy stayed consistent during this period, averaging 32 miles per gallon on my standardized 200-mile test loop, which consists of 40% highway, 40% suburban, and 20% city driving. The compression tests at 25,000, 50,000, 75,000, and 100,000 miles showed zero degradation from the baseline. Every cylinder maintained its original compression reading within 1 psi, and the leak down tests showed less than 3% leakage, which indicates perfect sealing. At this point in the test, I was convinced Premium Synthetic A was going to win convincingly. But then something changed. But something interesting happened after 100,000 miles. The wear metal readings began to creep upward, particularly iron and aluminum, which indicate cylinder bore wear and piston wear, respectively. By 150,000 miles, the iron levels had increased from an average of 14 ppm to 20 ppm. That might not sound significant, but it represents a 43% increase in wear rate. By 175,000 miles, iron was at 24 ppm. By 200,000 miles, it had reached 28 ppm, a full 100% increase compared to the first half of the test. The aluminum trend was similar, going from 7 ppm average in the first 100,000 miles to 12 ppm by 200,000 miles, a 71% increase. Even copper, which had been rock solid at 4 ppm, crept up to 7 ppm, suggesting that bearing clearances were opening up as the engine accumulated miles. The viscosity data also showed concerning trends. While the oil still met specifications, the rate of viscosity increase during use accelerated noticeably. In the first 100,000 miles, viscosity would increase about 3% over a 5,000-mile interval. In the second 100,000 miles, that increased to 5 to 6%, suggesting more oxidation and contamination was occurring. The total base number depletion, which had been averaging 45%, increased to 52% on average, meaning the oil was losing its protective capacity faster. This manifested in higher acid numbers in the used oil samples. Total acid number, which measures corrosive compounds in the oil, averaged 2.1 in the first half of the test, but jumped to 3.8 in the second half. Anything above 4.0 is considered problematic, so the oil was approaching that threshold. The borescope inspections revealed why these changes were occurring. At 150,000 miles, I noticed the crosshatch pattern on the cylinder walls was becoming less defined, particularly in the area where the piston rings travel at the top of their stroke. By 175,000 miles, the pattern was almost completely smooth in that zone, replaced by a polished appearance that looks good to the untrained eye but is actually a sign of accelerated wear. This is called bore glazing, or bore polishing, and it leads to increased oil consumption and eventually compression loss. The crosshatch pattern exists to hold a film of oil on the cylinder wall. When it's worn smooth, oil film thickness decreases, metal-to-metal contact increases, and wear accelerates in a self-reinforcing cycle. Once glazing starts, it's almost impossible to reverse without rehoning the cylinders, which means a complete engine teardown. The compression tests confirmed this trend. At 150,000 miles, cylinder 1 showed 3% compression loss. By 175,000 miles, it was 5%. By 200,000 miles, all four cylinders showed an average compression loss of 8% compared to the baseline. Cylinder 1, which runs hottest because it's closest to the timing chain and receives the least airflow, lost 10%. That might not sound catastrophic, but the trajectory was worrying. If I had continued the test to 250,000 miles, I suspect compression loss would have accelerated to 15 or 20%, at which point the engine would start burning oil, losing power, and developing cold start issues. The leak down tests back this up, showing that leakage past the rings had increased from 2% at 100,000 miles to 6% at 200,000 miles. The fuel economy also degraded more than the other vehicles, dropping from an average of 32 miles per gallon in the first 100,000 miles to 29 miles per gallon in the final 50,000 miles. That's a 9% loss in efficiency, which over the lifetime of the vehicle represents hundreds of dollars in additional fuel costs. What went wrong? My theory, supported by the oil analysis data, is that premium synthetic A prioritizes short-term performance over long-term durability. The additive package is aggressive, providing excellent protection when fresh, but it depletes faster than other formulations. By the end of a 5,000-mile interval, the total base number, which measures alkaline reserve, had dropped by an average of 45%. That's significantly more depletion than the other oils in the test. Once the TBN drops below a critical threshold, the oil loses its ability to neutralize acidic combustion byproducts, and corrosive wear begins to accelerate. Over 200,000 miles, this compounding effect became impossible to ignore. Car B used what I'll call conventional economy B, a basic mineral oil from a major retailer's house brand. At $22 per 5-quart jug, it was the cheapest option in the test by a significant margin. The viscosity rating met the manufacturer's specification. It carried the API certification Starburst, and the label claimed it met all modern engine requirements. Most mechanics would look at this oil and assume it's marginal at best, suitable for older vehicles or low-performance applications, but not something you'd trust in a modern engine with tight tolerances and variable valve timing. The data, however, told a different story. From day one, Car B exceeded expectations. The used oil analysis showed that while the additive package was simpler than the synthetics, it was remarkably stable. The total base number depletion averaged only 35% over 5,000 miles, better than premium synthetic A despite being less than half the price. The viscosity remained within specification throughout each interval, showing no significant shear breakdown or oxidative thickening. Wear metals were slightly higher than the full synthetics, but well within acceptable limits. Iron averaged 22 parts per million compared to 15 ppm for the best synthetic, which sounds worse but is still far below the 40 ppm threshold where concern begins. What really impressed me about Car B was consistency. There were no surprises, no sudden spikes in wear, no unexpected changes in oil condition. Every sample looked almost identical to the previous one, which indicates that the oil was doing its job reliably and predictably. By 200,000 miles, the engine showed only 4% compression loss, less than Car A despite using an oil that cost 65% less. The bore scope revealed minimal cylinder wear, with the crosshatch pattern still visible under magnification. Fuel economy remained stable, dropping only 3% over the entire test period, which is within the normal range as an engine ages. The valve cover inspection at 200,000 miles showed moderate varnish accumulation, more than the premium synthetics but nothing concerning. The oil passages were clear, the camshaft lobes showed normal wear patterns, and the valve train was quiet and properly lubricated. If I had to describe Car B's results in one word, it would be adequate. Not spectacular, not cutting edge, just solid, reliable, old-school protection that got the job done without drama and without breaking the bank. For someone who changes oil religiously every 5,000 miles and doesn't subject their engine to extreme conditions, this oil proved you don't need to spend a fortune to keep your engine healthy. But here's where it gets interesting. While Car B performed well, it didn't win, because there were still 3 more oils to discuss, and one of them delivered results that completely changed my understanding of what makes a great motor oil. Let me pause here for a second. If you've been following along and you're already thinking about switching oil brands, hold on. We're only at number 2 out of 5. The real surprises are still coming, and trust me, you don't want to make a decision until you hear about Car E. Share this with anyone who's passionate about engines, and let's keep going. Car C ran on what I'll call mid-grade synthetic C, a synthetic blend that mixed conventional base stock with synthetic components. Priced at $38 per jug, it occupied the middle ground between the budget conventional and the premium full synthetics. The marketing pitched it as offering 80% of synthetic performance at 60% of the cost, which if true, would make it the best value proposition in the oil aisle. Synthetic blends have always been controversial in the industry. Purists argue they're just conventional oil with marketing spin. Pragmatists counter that modern blends use enough synthetic content to provide measurable benefits. I went into this test genuinely curious which camp was right. The early results for Car C were promising. For the first 75,000 miles, the oil performed nearly identically to the full synthetics in terms of wear protection. Iron and aluminum readings were low, viscosity stayed stable, and additive depletion was moderate. The engine remained clean internally, and there were no mechanical issues whatsoever. Fuel economy matched the manufacturer's ratings, and the compression tests showed 0 degradation. If the test had stopped at 75,000 miles, I would have declared synthetic blends the winner on a cost-benefit basis. But long-term tests exist precisely because short-term performance doesn't tell the whole story. Between 75,000 and 150,000 miles, subtle changes began to appear. The wear metal readings started trending upward, slowly at first, then more noticeably after 125,000 miles. The iron levels increased from an average of 16 ppm in the first half to 28 ppm in the second half. Aluminum went from 8 ppm to to 14 ppm. Copper, which indicates bearing wear, jumped from 5 ppm to 11 ppm. None of these numbers crossed into the danger zone, but the trend was clear. The oil's protective capacity was declining at a faster rate than it had in the first 75,000 miles. The total base number depletion also accelerated, going from 38% in early samples to 52% in later samples over the same 5,000-mile interval. By 200,000 miles, Car C's engine showed 7% compression loss, more than Car B but less than Car A. The bore scope inspection revealed something interesting. The cylinder walls showed uneven wear patterns with more wear at the top of the stroke where temperatures are highest. This suggests the synthetic blend struggled more with thermal stability than the full synthetics, allowing localized breakdown of the oil film under extreme heat. The valve cover showed moderate to heavy varnish, particularly around the cam caps and oil return passages. This indicates that the oil's detergent package couldn't keep pace with deposit formation as the miles accumulated. Fuel economy degraded 6% over the test period, worse than Car B but better than Car A. The overall assessment: synthetic blends work, but they're not miracle products. They provide better protection than straight conventional oil, especially in the first 100,000 miles, but they don't match full synthetics for long-term durability. If you're planning to keep your car for 150,000 miles or less, a quality synthetic blend is a smart choice that saves money without significant compromise. But if you're targeting 200,000 plus miles, the data suggests you should either commit to full synthetic or stick with conventional and accept slightly higher wear rates. The middle ground turned out to be exactly that. Neither the best nor the worst, but somewhere in between. Car D used what I'll call Premium Synthetic D, a different brand from Car A but in the same price range at $55 per jug. This oil marketed itself specifically toward high-mileage engines, with claims of enhanced seal conditioners to prevent leaks, extra detergents to clean sludge, and boosted anti-wear additives to protect worn components. I'll be honest, I was skeptical. High-mileage oils have always struck me as marketing targeted at desperate owners with neglected engines, but I included it in the test to see if there was any substance behind the claims. The results were genuinely surprising. For the first 50,000 miles, Car D performed identically to the other premium synthetics. Low wear metals, stable viscosity, minimal additive depletion, clean engine internals. Nothing about the data suggested this oil was different in any meaningful way, but then something unusual happened around 80,000 miles. The wear metal readings, which had been slowly increasing like they did in all the other cars, suddenly plateaued. Iron stabilized at 17 ppm and stayed there for the next 120,000 miles. Aluminum held at 9 ppm. Copper at 6 ppm. It was as if the engine reached a steady-state equilibrium where wear was occurring so slowly that it became almost unmeasurable against the background noise of normal oil contamination. I initially thought this was a fluke or a measurement error, so I requested duplicate analysis on several samples. The lab confirmed the results. Something about this oil's formulation was providing protection that actually improved over time rather than degrading. When I looked deeper into the used oil analysis, I found the answer in the additive metals. The zinc and phosphorus levels, which are the primary anti-wear compounds, depleted much more slowly in this oil compared to the others. By the end of a 5,000-mile interval, Car D retained 70% of its original ZDDP concentration, while the other oils retained only 55 to 60%. That extra 10 to 15% of remaining anti-wear additive was making a measurable difference in protection. The seal conditioning claims also proved legitimate. None of the 5 cars developed oil leaks during the test, but Car D showed the least amount of valve cover gasket seepage and oil pan gasket weeping at the 200,000-mile inspection. The gaskets were still pliable, still doing their job, while the gaskets on some of the other cars had begun to harden and shrink slightly. This is the kind of detail most people never notice until they're dealing with an oil spot on the driveway, but it matters for long-term reliability and maintenance costs. At 200,000 miles, Car D showed only 3% compression loss, the second best result in the entire test. The cylinder walls looked excellent, with clear crosshatching still visible and no glazing. The valve train was exceptionally clean, with minimal varnish and zero sludge accumulation. Fuel economy remained the most stable of any vehicle in the test, dropping only 2% over 200,000 miles. If someone asked me to recommend an oil for a high-mileage vehicle or for someone planning to keep their car until the wheels fall off, premium synthetic D would be near the top of my list. The only downside is the price, but when you calculate the cost per mile of protection, it's actually competitive with cheaper oils that need more frequent changes or lead to earlier mechanical failures. All right, we're down to the final oil, Car E, and I saved it for last because it's the one that won. But before I reveal which brand it was and why it dominated, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had an engine fail because of oil-related issues? Or do you have a car with crazy high mileage that's still running strong? Drop your story in the comments because the community always has incredible insights. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. You're about to find out which oil you should be buying. Car E ran on what I'll call full synthetic E, a premium oil from a manufacturer with deep roots in racing and motorsports. At $52 per jug, it was expensive, but not the most expensive in the test. The marketing emphasized extreme temperature stability, advanced friction modifiers, and long drain capability, though I stuck to the same 5,000-mile interval as the other cars to keep the test fair. This oil has a cult following among enthusiasts, particularly those who track their cars or drive aggressively, but it's also commonly dismissed as overpriced when compared to more mainstream brands. The packaging is understated, almost clinical, with technical data sheets readily available and no flashy marketing claims. The company's website features white papers on tribology, lubrication theory, and additive chemistry rather than testimonials from celebrities. After 200,000 miles, I can tell you definitively that the cult following is justified, and the dismissals are completely wrong. From the very first oil change, Car E stood out in ways that seemed almost too good to be true. The used oil analysis showed something I'd never seen before in 20 years of looking at oil reports. At 5,000 miles, with the oil fully used and ready for change, the viscosity had shifted by less than 2% from its fresh specification. Fresh oil measured 11, 3 centistokes at 100 degrees Celsius. Used oil measured 11.5 centistokes. Most oils show 5 to 8% viscosity change over a similar interval due to oxidation, thermal breakdown, and contamination. This oil was essentially unchanged, suggesting the base stock quality and additive package were operating at a completely different level than conventional products. The total base number depletion was only 28%, the lowest of any oil in the test, and a strong indicator that the additive package was not only robust, but also extremely efficient at its job. Fresh TBN was 11.2. Used TBN was 8.1. For context, most oils are considered depleted and in need of changing when TBN drops below 3.0. Car E's oil was finishing its service interval with more active additive remaining than some of the other oils had at the start. The implications of this are enormous. It means every component in the engine was being protected by fresh, active chemistry throughout the entire drain interval, not just for the first 3,000 miles followed by degraded protection for the final 2,000 miles. Wear metals were minimal to the point of being difficult to believe. Iron at 12 parts per million, aluminum at 6 ppm, copper at 4 ppm, lead at 2 ppm, chromium at 3 ppm. These numbers would be impressive for an engine with 20,000 miles, let alone one approaching 250,000 total miles. To put this in perspective, the industry threshold for concern with iron is typically 40 ppm. Car E never even approached half that level. The additive metals also told a compelling story. Zinc remained at 850 ppm after 5,000 miles, down from 1,250 ppm fresh, representing only 32% depletion. Phosphorus was at 780 ppm used versus 1,150 ppm fresh, also 32% depletion. Calcium, which is a key detergent carrier, stayed at 2,100 ppm used versus 2,800 ppm fresh, just 25% depletion. But here's what really separated this oil from everything else. The wear metal curves stayed flat, absolutely, perfectly flat. In every other car, wear metals increased over time as the engine accumulated miles. That's normal, that's expected. Engines wear, it's physics. But Car E defied this pattern. At 50,000 miles, iron was 12 ppm. At 100,000 miles, iron was 13 ppm. At 150,000 miles, iron was 12 ppm again. At 200,000 miles, iron was 14 ppm. That's not an increasing trend. That's statistical noise. The same pattern held for aluminum, copper, and every other wear metal. The engine was wearing so slowly that it couldn't be distinguished from normal background contamination. I've never seen anything like it, and according to the laboratory technician who processed my samples, neither had he. As the miles accumulated, Car E's advantages became even more pronounced. While the other oils showed increasing wear rates after 100,000 miles, Car E maintained almost perfectly flat wear curves. Iron never exceeded 14 ppm. Aluminum stayed below 7 ppm. Copper held at 5 ppm. The consistency was remarkable, suggesting that the oil was providing such effective protection that normal wear mechanisms were suppressed to near negligible levels. The viscosity stability continued throughout the entire 200,000 miles, with samples at 150,000 miles showing the same minimal degradation as samples at 50,000 miles. The engine internals told the story even more clearly. At 200,000 miles, when I pulled the valve cover for the final inspection, the camshafts and lifters looked almost new. There was zero varnish, zero sludge. The metal surfaces showed a slight polish from normal contact, but no scoring, no pitting, no wear steps. It was the cleanest high-mileage engine I have ever seen. The oil passages were clear enough that I could see light through them. The PCV system, which in the other cars showed signs of oil vapor residue, was clean. When I dropped the oil pan, the pickup screen was pristine. The main and rod bearings, which I had pulled to inspect, showed wear patterns that would be normal for an engine with 80,000 miles, not 250,000. The compression test results were stunning. Car E showed zero measurable compression loss compared to the baseline. Not 1%, not 2%, zero. All four cylinders measured within 1 psi of their original readings, which is within the margin of error for the gauge. The leak down test confirmed it. Less than 2% leakage on all cylinders, indicating that the rings were sealing perfectly and the valves were seating properly. This is unheard of for a 250,000-mile engine. The bore scope inspection showed cylinder walls with cross-hatching that looked like it had been honed last week. No glazing, no scoring, no ridge at the top of the bore, just smooth, consistent surface texture exactly as the factory intended. Fuel economy? Car E actually improved slightly over the test period, gaining 1% efficiency between the first 50,000 miles and the last 50,000 miles. I attribute this to the engine maintaining its mechanical integrity so well that friction losses never increased the way they did in the other vehicles. When an engine wears, even slightly, the increased clearances and rougher surfaces create more parasitic losses that rob power and fuel efficiency. Car E avoided this completely. At 200,000 miles, it drove like a car with 75,000 miles. Smooth, quiet, responsive, and efficient. So, what made full synthetic E so superior? After analyzing 40 oil samples from this vehicle and comparing them to the 32 samples from each of the other 4 cars, several factors emerged that explained the dramatic performance difference. First, the base oil quality was exceptional in ways that go far beyond simple synthetic versus conventional classifications. Synthetic oils are not all created equal. They can be made from several different processes, including Group 3 highly refined conventional oils that are processed through severe hydrocracking and isomerization to remove impurities and restructure the molecules. These technically qualify as synthetic under U.S. labeling laws but are really just very clean conventional oils. Then there's Group 4 polyalpha olefin, which are true synthetic molecules built from simple hydrocarbon building blocks in a controlled chemical process. Pio oils have uniform molecular structure, meaning every molecule molecule is nearly identical, which gives them excellent low-temperature fluidity and high-temperature stability. Finally, there are Group V esters, which are synthetic molecules with polar functional groups that give them natural attraction to metal surfaces and excellent cleaning properties. Most synthetic oils on the market are blends of Group 3 and Group V, with maybe 5% Group V added for marketing purposes. Premium synthetic A, for example, appeared to be roughly 60% Group 3, 35% Group 4, and 5% Group V based on how it behaved in the viscosity and oxidation tests. Full synthetic E appeared to use a completely different formula. Based on consultation with petroleum engineers who reviewed my data, the consensus was that Car E's oil was probably 70% Group V PAO, 25% Group V ester, and only 5% Group 3. This inverted ratio means the base oil itself is doing more of the work, requiring less additive loading to achieve superior performance. Second, the additive package was clearly formulated for long-term protection rather than short-term performance. This is a philosophical difference in oil chemistry that most consumers never hear about. Some oils are designed to show impressive results in the first 2,000 miles, with high initial levels of anti-wear compounds and friction modifiers that get depleted quickly. This makes them look great in short-term dyno tests and advertising claims. Other oils are designed with slower acting, more stable additives that provide consistent protection over tens of thousands of miles. Car E was clearly in the second category. The anti-wear compounds, primarily zinc dialkyl dithiaphosphate, depleted slowly and evenly at about 6% per 1,000 miles. The detergents, which were calcium and magnesium-based sulfonates, depleted at only 5% per 1,000 miles. The viscosity modifiers, which are long-chain polymers that maintain proper thickness across temperature ranges, showed almost zero shear breakdown even after 5,000 miles of service. This is sophisticated chemistry that requires expensive raw materials and careful formulation, but the payoff in engine protection is undeniable. Third, and this is something I only figured out after consulting with a tribology engineer who specializes in lubrication science, the friction modifiers in this oil were fundamentally different from the other brands. Most oils use organic friction modifiers, typically molybdenum dithiocarbamate or amine-based compounds that reduce friction by creating a boundary layer between metal surfaces. These work, but they're consumable. They get used up as the oil ages, and their effectiveness decreases over time. Full synthetic E appeared to use a combination of organic and inorganic friction modifiers, specifically including molybdenum disulfide compounds that actually bond chemically to metal surfaces. These molybdenum compounds create a solid lubricant film that remains even if the oil film breaks down momentarily, providing protection during cold starts, high load conditions, and other situations where oil film thickness is compromised. The evidence for this was in the molybdenum levels in the used oil samples. While other oils showed moly decreasing from use, Car E's samples showed moly levels that decreased initially but then stabilized, suggesting it was plating onto engine surfaces rather than being consumed or expelled. The cost analysis is where things get really interesting, and where most people make the wrong decision based on incomplete information. Over 200,000 miles at 5,000-mile intervals, each car received exactly 40 oil changes. Car E's total oil cost was $2,080, calculated at $52 per change times 40 changes. Car A's was $2,400 at $60 per change. Car B's was $880 at $22 per change. Car C's was $1,520 at $38 per change. Car D's was $2,200 at $55 per change. At first glance, looking only at the oil expense, Car B appears to be the overwhelming winner. You'd save $1,200 compared to Car E over 200,000 miles. That's significant money that could pay for a lot of other maintenance or upgrades. But this analysis is fatally flawed because it ignores the total cost of ownership. Let's dig deeper into what those savings actually mean. Car B, despite performing admirably for a conventional oil, showed 4% compression loss by 200 200,000 miles. That compression loss will continue to worsen, and based on the trajectory, the engine will need at least a ring job and possibly a full rebuild within the next 50,000 miles. A quality ring job, which involves removing the pistons, honing the cylinders, installing new rings, and replacing all seals and gaskets, costs between $1,500 and $3,000 depending on location and shop rates. Let's call it $2,000 for a mid-range estimate. A full rebuild, if the cylinder wear is too severe for just rings, runs between $3,000 and $5,000. So that $880 oil savings suddenly looks very different when you factor in a $2,000 engine repair bill. The real cost of Car B isn't $880, it's $2,880 or more. Car A, which used the most expensive oil, showed 8% compression loss and will need even more extensive work even sooner. The bore glazing I documented means the cylinders will need to be bored over size. Oversized pistons will need to be fitted, and the entire bottom end should probably be inspected for bearing wear. You're looking at a $4,000 to $6,000 rebuild. Add that to the $2,400 in oil costs, and Car A's real total is $6,400 minimum. Car C will need a similar rebuild to Car B, putting its real cost at around $3,500. Car D will need minimal work, maybe just a valve cover gasket replacement and some PCV system cleaning, adding perhaps $300 to its oil cost for a total of $2,500. Car E, on the other hand, will run another 200,000 miles without major work. Zero rebuild needed, zero ring job needed. The only maintenance required is continuing the same oil change schedule and replacing wear items like spark plugs and filters. Its total cost remains $2,080, making it by far the cheapest option when you calculate cost per mile of reliable operation. $2,080 divided by 200,000 miles equals roughly 1 cent per mile for oil. Even if you project that out to 400,000 miles, which this engine is clearly capable of reaching, the cost per mile drops to half a cent. Compare that to Car B at 1.4 cents per mile including repairs, or Car A at 3.2 cents per mile including its inevitable rebuild. The premium oil isn't expensive. The cheap oil is expensive because it costs you more in the long run. But there's more to this analysis. Fuel economy degradation represents another hidden cost that most people never calculate. Car A lost 9% fuel efficiency over the test period, dropping from 32 mmHg to 29 mmHg. At current fuel prices of roughly $3.50 per gallon, and assuming 15,000 miles driven per year, that efficiency loss costs an additional $220 per year in fuel. Over the 200,000-mile test period, that's approximately $3,000 in extra fuel costs. Add that to the oil cost and rebuild cost, and Car A's real total climbs to over $9,000. Car E, which actually gained 1% efficiency, saved money on fuel compared to its baseline. The comprehensive cost analysis reveals that the winning oil wasn't just the best for engine protection. It was also the most economical choice when all factors are considered. But here's the thing that I need to emphasize strongly. I'm not going to tell you which specific brand full synthetic E is. Not because I'm hiding it, not because I'm trying to create mystery, but because the brand name isn't the point. Brand names change. Formulations change. Companies get bought out, manufacturing gets outsourced, and a great oil can become mediocre overnight when accountants start cutting costs. What I want you to take away from this test isn't, go buy brand X. What I want you to understand is what makes a truly great motor oil so you can evaluate products independently without relying on marketing, brand loyalty, or price as your only decision factors. Look for oils with high Group V base stock content. Check for molybdenum in the additive package. Research the manufacturer's background in racing or severe duty applications, because those environments reveal oil weaknesses faster than anything else. Read used oil analysis reports from independent labs, not from the oil companies themselves. And most importantly, commit to consistent change intervals, because even the best oil in the world can't protect an engine if you stretch it beyond its design limits. I'll give you a hint though. The winning oil came from a company company that builds racing engines and has a technical department you can actually call and speak to chemists and engineers. It's not sold in every gas station or big box store. You usually have to buy it from specialty retailers or directly from the manufacturer. And yes, it costs more, but as this test proved beyond any doubt, it's worth every penny if you care about your engine lasting. One more thing before we wrap up. This test took 5 years to complete and cost me roughly $70,000 in vehicle purchases, oil, lab analysis, and documentation. I'm not rich. I did this because I'm passionate about separating fact from fiction in the automotive world. If you found this information valuable, the best way to support this kind of independent research is to share this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more content where I put products to the test so you don't have to. No sponsorships, no affiliate links, just real data from real-world testing. The Japanese mechanic who inspired this test passed away 3 years ago. I never got to show him the final results, but I think he would have smiled at the outcome. The oil you choose really is more important than the car you drive. Choose wisely, change it regularly, and your engine will reward you with hundreds of thousands of miles of reliable service. Now, go check your oil level, and I'll see you in the next one.